acknowledge her when she arrives. So thank you everybody for joining us for this XCAP meeting. I guess I'll ask Sarah to call the roll for us.
Okie doke. Okay, so Greg Braille we know is coming late. Phil Burton.
Here.
Tony Carrasco.
Here.
In-Young Cho will be here soon. Larry Klein.
Here.
Nadia Naik.
Here.
Keith Reckdahl.
Keith, are you here? I see your name.
He's probably just muted.
Might be.
May not realize it.
No, I am here.
Okay.
My window was buried and I was frantically trying to find out how to unmute myself.
No worries.
Dave Shen.
Here.
Carrie Templeton.
Here.
Okay, great.
Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. We are going to start today with the staff update. We had two documents in there. One is the response to XCAP's comments/questions, which Ripon was nice enough to write for us. I'm assuming it was Ripon, so I'm going to give you credit, Ripon. And then we also have a draft summary of the virtual town hall. So I'll turn it over to staff and let's hear what they got.
Thank you. Yeah, so thanks for the, giving Ripon thanks for, the item that he pulled that all together, which was essentially the things that we responded last week, just in written form. I don't know that Ripon, are there any changes that you wanted to, anything new in that you wanted to talk about?
I think we just put it in a nice format and provided the update in the table. So a lot of information was presented verbally at the last meeting, and this formalizes the response in more, systematic manner.
Yeah, thank you. That was my understanding. So apart from that, XCAP members should have received this draft community meeting summary from the virtual town hall meeting. And just note that city staff received this not very long before sending it out to you. So it hasn't gone, under any serious, well, it hasn't gone under any editing as of yet. But I hope that you've all had a chance to take a look at it. It's covers quite a lot of info. And the one thing that I do want to note from it, which comes up in section 2 of the report, under the Q&A sessions, there are links externally to the Connecting Palo Alto website to where we've posted the questions and answers that we received for the initial 2 Q&A sessions. So with that, I'll leave it to everyone to read this report. We just wanted to make sure that it got in your hands as soon as possible. And with that, if I can figure out how to stop sharing, I'll be available for any questions.
Thank you, Philip. And full disclosure, I had a chance to glance at this, but I'm going to take more time to read through all of the comments as we continue to write this report, because there's a lot of additional feedback that looks like it's pretty meaty. I'm very proud of my fellow Palo Altans for sending us the ultimate super geeky comments that one could expect from a town hall. They really show that you guys have been paying attention and listening, and that I think in the last several years, everybody learned a lot about grade separations, and I think it's reflected in the quality of the comments that we're getting from the community. And so, thanks to everybody, and thanks to XCAP, because I think a lot of it has to do with the work that we've been doing. So go team.
And also the level of engagement to add on to that.
Yeah.
Not just that one person spent time on there, but the number of people that actually took the time to visit the site. So I hopefully everybody watching did, and thank you for everyone for participating.
And is that, I know this is our first virtual town hall, but what is the normal kind of rate of return of questions? I saw that we had like 20% responded. That seemed like a good response rate. How does it measure with other events? Is it hard to tell because we don't know, or?
I don't think that's even consistent across, different types of events. So I don't think it's real easy to compare.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. XCappers, you guys have any questions either on the virtual town hall summary or on what Ripon wrote the responses? Sure, Tony.
I need more time to look at it. I've just glanced through it. It's well organized, so it's an easy read, but I haven't done that.
Did you mean the town hall or did you mean the responses?
I mean the town hall.
The town hall, okay. Keith, not to put you on the spot, but you had raised a lot of the questions that were responded to. Did you have any additional questions, or did you even get a chance to read this thing to know whether you have any additional questions?
I'm scanning through it right now. I mean, some of the stuff, for example, the swinging of the tracks for the viaduct hasn't been discussed in detail with Caltrain. So that's the bottom line. Is the answer is, have you gotten approval? I guess the short answer is no.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I did notice that one. And Tony, did you understand the light plane's response?
I have not gone to that. I have not seen it, Nadia.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. Just if you guys could take a look. So if we have questions next week, then that's a good.
Nadia, just a quick question. I was quite surprised to see the amount being spent or estimated to be spent on flagging. So my question is that typical, or I know you say it's unusually high because of our situation here, but just the total amount of it was rather surprising to me anyway.
The amount of, I'm sorry, you did I understood flagging?
Flagging, F-L-A-G-G-I-G.
Where, so can you point me to where that is? I think I've missed that because I'm like Keith, I've scanned this, but didn't get a chance to read in depth.
Is it on page, towards the end, page 4?
It's page 3 right in the middle.
Okay. Yeah, what does that mean? What is the flagging?
Well, I looked it up, Googled it, and it means just what you think it means.
Okay, I have a very active imagination, and in my mind, they're standing there like the YMCA people with flags.
That's it. Right.
Yeah, and one of the reason could be is because the freight line, which is owned and operated by Union Pacific Railroad, when that one is at grade, and we would have to pay railroad to do the flagging on their for their lines. And if they have to continue to run during the construction time, there has to be provided flagger, which is a railroad employee pay and their costs associated with it. So that may be one of the reasons with the flagging cost.
Let me jump in and say that that's the way it used to be done until automatic crossing gates got invented. But I can't see automatic crossing gates being installed for temporary construction.
Yeah, and even if the automatic gates are present during construction, they would want to have the flagging because typically that's what I have experienced on my projects in the back. Union Pacific would require us to put a flagger even if there's a construction zone.
Yeah, well,
but this one's going on an electrified shoe fly. So presumably you wouldn't need that, right?
Well, actually you might. Let me jump in on this one because the railroad can never assume that the tracks are always clear from construction equipment or temporary blockages or people on the tracks. So for safety's sake, there's got to be flagmen or flag people these days to protect the active site. And if there are 2 or 3 separate construction zones, you're going to have that many flag people, one at each end, typically. It gets expensive.
Right.
I just want to back that up. And normal construction, during construction, you need to employ flagmen. What I don't see is that the city is going to have costs to construct anything here with diverted traffic and their own flagmen. So I would like to get some estimate of city costs in addition to the actual construction of the train tracks. So in that respect, the private sector as well as the public sectors, the local costs are not included in these estimates. It would be good to get some kind of indication of what those, or estimates of what those costs might be?
What I like to say, Mr. Krasko, is that typically for a project-related construction services, that would be under the contractor services. So they will be providing, and all the flagging costs that would be required, including the construction for roadway and or railways, like any assistance that is required to accommodate during the school crossings in the construction zones will be made responsibility of the contractor with oversight of the city.
So are you saying that in gross terms, those are be already included in the buckets that you show on page 5 of the various, there's
Correct.
construction costs, escalation costs, so they're buried in there somewhere?
Correct. The traffic control cost would be part of the construction cost that will be provided by the contractor as part of the construction of the contract.
So these are all in numbers, no extras.
Correct.
Okay. Does that help, Tony?
Well,
Yeah. But I'm a little suspicious that that we don't have everything, because you're going to need to divert cars early on near 101 maybe, or near Lewis Road sometimes. But as long as we've got everything in, I'm happy.
Yeah, I would say at this planning stage, it's a bundled in number. As we get more, this will be a line item on the contractor scope of services as part of their bidding cost, and the staging and those other phases will be developed as part of the construction design elements, and we would develop more concrete locations where this will be diverted, where the flagging, where more of the detours and all that coordination will be done as part of the design first, as well as the construction management office.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Larry? Yep, Larry.
well, I understand the need for the flagman. I'm just struck by the cost. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but you're saying $35 million for flagging costs, and I'm saying that looks to me like it's almost all personnel. And if I say that the average hourly rate for the people doing the flag work is $35 an hour, since this isn't very skilled work, that's 1 million hours of time. I just can't believe that. That's incredible.
Yeah, I can certainly find out the more details about the construction flagging cost, why that is that high from AECom, because that was flagged over there by them. But I would be surprised by the hourly rates which Union Pacific charge for any of the item for flagging. So don't be surprised by that.
Okay, $70 an hour. That's 500,000 hours.
No, I'm not denying your
years.
fact, so we will get more clarity on that, on the numbers, but I'm saying it may be including other flagging costs for detouring the traffics, and so we can get you more description of what those costs entails.
Yeah, and I wouldn't, Larry, I wouldn't just assume those are only an hourly cost associated with that. But like Ripon said, we'll get you a little more detail on that.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, see none. We can move to item number 3, which is oral communications. And so if we have members of the public who want to speak to an item that is not currently on the agenda, now would be a great time to raise your hand. And you can have 2 minutes to speak. And let's see, got 2 people so far. All right, I'll turn it over to the team.
We have 2 people in line to talk. The first person is Carrie Wagner, followed by Karen Kalinski. Carrie, you may begin to speak now. And unmute yourself, please. Carrie, you may begin to speak now. Please unmute yourself.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't unmute myself for some reason. What I'd like to say is some number of years ago. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, some number of years ago, the city created Oregon Expressway, which turned into a significant divider for the city. The city is still sensitive to it this day. People do not like to talk about North Palo Alto versus South Palo Alto. So I think we need to be really sensitive to this type of situation we have for high-speed rail coming through. We need to be careful not to divide the city in another direction. It's something we're going to have to live with for 100 years. So please just be careful about how that comes out. And as far as connecting neighborhoods with new housing going in areas, hopefully like the North Ventura area, we really need a good east-west connect for bikes and pedestrians. So I'm going to put in another plug for the Loma Verde underpass or overpass or whatever it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our last speaker for oral communication is Karen Kalinsky. It is your turn to speak now. Please unmute yourself and begin speaking.
Hi, this is Karen. In general, I don't believe that the fact that some homeowners might be thinking of selling and would be happy to have their properties acquired should be taken into consideration when choosing among alternatives. If one particular alternative design includes property takings, those properties could change, which properties they are change as the designs for crossings are further developed and refined. I'm sure that for some affected homeowners, it would not be just a matter of receiving fair monetary compensation for their home. There is no way to be compensated for having to move away from your neighborhood, which frequently includes being close to friends, family, places of worship, schools, service providers like doctors and dentists, etc. So please consider property acquisition as a strongly negative factor when deciding on your recommended alternative. If possible, it should be avoided. Thank you. I have 50 seconds left, and I'll just tell you I ride a recumbent tricycle, and it measures 7 feet long by 28 inches wide. It's a recumbent trike. That's my mode of transportation frequently. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. We do not have any more speakers on this item, Nadia.
Okay, thanks so much for that. Okay, that means we are on to the meat of our meeting, which is, actually, sorry, we're on to number 4. I'm sorry, I couldn't print out the agenda. I had a problem with my printer, but I'm seeing it now. So next is XCAP member updates. And so we need to talk about how the sausage making is going. So anybody have any comments, any questions, what should I be doing, or I forgot to do something, or now's time to talk about it. For myself, I will say I am still working. Tony and I have to touch base, but we have to finish writing our the thing about the viaduct at Churchill that you wanted to write, Tony. And then working with Phil and Keith, myself on our 3 position on the Churchill element. So that's in progress, but I don't have a draft yet for everybody. Anybody else? Yep,
So
Tony. Sorry, Phil, and then Greg.
I just wonder if anybody's had a chance to read the findings, chapter 4 draft, and provide any feedback. I'm hoping to finish it, to wrap it up, and with another submission, the final one this coming week. Yeah, Tony was raising his hand. I didn't mean
Go
to.
ahead,
cut you off,
Tony, go ahead.
So I read it. I sort of glanced at it, and the organization is just really well done. I haven't read all of the little detail, but I'm going to do that, Phil, and I'll send you comments. But I don't think I might not have any.
All right.
But I will read it.
Thank you.
Read the detail.
I saw Greg, and then I think I saw Larry.
Yeah. So you mentioned writing something for the report about Churchill. Is somebody writing a report about the thing that the majority of us voted for to explain why we did that?
That is
What section is that, and who's responsible for it?
Well, so Larry and I are supposed to write that section, but we have not
Okay.
powwowed on that section. But it might be Larry and somebody else, since I'm also right in the minority position. So we might have to group Larry with somebody to kind of push that forward. I'll put that on our discussion list so that I can get back to you on exactly where that's going. Needless to say, the writing is going slower than we expected. I mean, I just think it's really busy for everybody to have weekly meetings and be writing and getting things turned around in time. Not to mention, I don't know about y'all, but it's been a crazy week just generally, right? Between smoke and fires and everything. So I think it's taking a little bit longer. In full disclosure, since at our last meeting, the city manager indicated that no matter what report we come up with, it is the next council that's dealing with this. It does give us some breathing room, but we would still like to kind of, push towards this timeline. So we're working, but we should be working harder, and we're trying that's all I can say. Did anybody else have anything? Larry, did you want to say something? No. Okay.
Nadia, can I just comment that in light of what you just said, I think I will wait a week. That is, instead of trying to submit the final version of chapter 4 this coming Friday for upload, I'll wait a week so people can get a chance to read the report, the chapter. I really need the feedback. I mean, I'm so deep into it. I can't see the forest for the trees.
Great. We appreciate it. Phil. Thank you. Sounds good. Yeah, Carrie?
Are we going to talk a little bit more about what you just mentioned with the schedule? I'm worried that, one, we could burn people out and we don't have that many people left. And two, like you said, we could be using this time to process the information if we had an off week. Is this the right time to talk about that? Are you thinking about talking about that?
So I don't think we were thinking of having 1 week less, although I guess it's possible if we finalize an answer today, we might be able to give ourselves a week off and start to write. I think that can be something I can discuss with Larry, but like right now, the idea
finalize
is
an answer on
Meadow Charleston. In other words, if we have a vote today, then we could potentially take a week off so we could write and then bring something back to the group. That's what I mean. But if we don't come to some conclusion today, we'll have to go again next week. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that wasn't exactly where I was going, but okay.
Sure, go ahead. What did you mean then?
Well, it sounds like there's stuff that people want to read and do and catch up with. And you and I've talked a little bit about it, and I thought we were gonna, at some point, bring it back to the group. So I just was checking about if and when we're gonna talk about the pace at which we're moving. It sounds like, are you comfortable with this pace?
Well, we have committed to go forward, and unless we hear from the group that, nobody's comfortable making a decision, then we have to continue to push at this pace. That's where we are. So I guess once we deliberate today, we'll know.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay. All right. I still see In Young is missing. I'm hoping she'll be able to join us. And if someone wants to text her, that would be great. All right. So then now we're on to item number 5, which is the continuation of deliberations for Meadow Charleston. So as this is a continuing item, if there's any member of the audience who has not had a chance to speak to us at these meetings about this item, now would be the chance to raise your hand and speak. But if you've already spoken, we're going to ask that you can send us an email at the xcap@cityofpaloalto.com, and that's the best way to send us more feedback, because we're only allowing folks to speak once at these meetings. And it looks like I've got 2 folks. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
We have 2 people for this item.
And they each get 3 minutes, please.
Each person get 3 minutes. The first person is Cedric, followed by Kathy Jordan. Cedric, it's your turn to speak. Please unmute yourself and begin speaking.
Yes, hi. So I've kind of just fallen off of the radar a bit, so I'm not really sure where y'all are at in terms of your deliberations and which options you guys are leaning towards. We saw the option that has the kind of roundabout over on Meadow or Charleston, I forget which. I think that we saw that in the Bicycle Advisory Committee meeting, and the committee was pretty much unanimous in feeling that that option was pretty bad for bicycle safety. The 2-lane roundabouts really dangerous for bicycles. entrance and egress through the bike bed tunnel being all on one side of the street is dangerous because you've got to cross over to the wrong side of the street, one way or the other to get there or get out. So I really hope you guys don't go with that option, or at least if you seek to get more input from the bicycling advisory committee. And then otherwise, I would say I think that the viaduct is the best option. Frankly, it's further away from the houses along Park, so even though it's a little bit taller than the hybrid option, it is 60 feet further from the home. So perceptually, it looks actually lower. It has the least vibration of all of the options, other than maybe a tunnel, but the tunnel is obviously just astronomically expensive. The trench option, I think both the trench and the tunnel are just terrible in terms of the impact on the creek, and just ridiculous costs. So really hope you guys don't go that way into recommending either of those prices options. Yeah, I think the viaduct is the best for all these reasons. I provided more feedback in the survey, but I hope that that's the one you choose. I guess I'll leave it at that. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kathy Jordan, followed by Jordan Fester. Kathy, please unmute yourself and you may begin to speak now.
Yes, I'd like to ask, I'm sorry, I think I saw on the agenda that the meeting was starting at 4 rather than at 3:30. So I apologize. May I still speak to more of an open forum type of issue, or am I restricted on this item here?
I think you're restricted to this item, but you can always send us an email, Kathy.
So the agenda mentioned that the meeting would be shifted from 4/7 from 3:30.
Yeah, there was an update that went out Monday morning.
And this was on Connecting Palo Alto that I was looking at the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
It's saying that it was shifted back, you mean?
Nope, the meeting got changed and it went out through all the different channels. I'd have to ask the Office of Transportation people to get back to you on what are the channels that they describe those on, but the meeting notice went out.
Okay, well, yeah, that's fine. I was looking online just today, so seems a little odd. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Our next speaker is Jordan Fester. Jordan, it's your time to speak. You may unmute yourself and talk now.
Good afternoon. I'm recalling some conversation that was had last week regarding the underpass at Charleston and Meadow. I did send a message to XCAP. I sent a message to the city. I haven't heard anything back, but I really wanted to take issue with the misrepresentation that anyone on the Charleston corridor got anything, an email, a phone call, a paper tag on our doors. Mr. Burton had brought it up, and Mr. Comby had mentioned that we did get information. I want to be very clear here for full transparency. Nobody on the Charleston corridor who would be affected by the underpass received any type of communication. Furthermore, I've met with everyone who would be impacted on my street. To be clear, we are not interested in selling. We don't want our homes taken from us. An eminent domain is defined as taking the home of someone, whether or not you compensate them, of course, which is not the issue. Another caller today had mentioned compensation. This is our home. This is our investment. This is our community. We do not want to be forced out. There is not some mysterious price that anyone should be using to mitigate feeling badly about really canceling Palo Alto citizens. We are not interested. We don't want it. The trench, when it is actually relooked at, and I really encourage you to relook it with an independent eye, the pricing. I lived in Reno. We had 3 times the size for 1/3 of the price and half the time. The underpass will disturb our area in Southern Palo Alto for such a long time for something we are not interested in. And the trench with the right pricing is something to go back and look at. And I would encourage you to think about looking further into investigating the trench option with someone independent for the correct pricing, because as it stands, it is a misrepresentation of the value add and the cost of the trench. Just like the misrepresentation, anyone from the city has contacted us or any of the members living in an apartment complex. And while certainly property values will be impacted on the whole quarter, minimally for the homes that we're potentially looking at, a blue line, and that should have had a conversation. No, Mr. Comby, nobody received anything. And I feel XCAP, in full transparency, should know before they make a decision to send a recommendation to City Hall that no, we never were impacted, we never were told about the impacts, there never was a conversation. Please think about keeping all Palo Altans in Palo Alto when you make a decision for us and for the next couple generations. The trench is a solution, not an option. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. We have one more speaker. Our next speaker is Stephanie Martinson. It's your turn to speak. Please unmute yourself and begin speaking.
Hi, this is Stephanie Martinson from Park Boulevard. I'm hearing some comments relative to Charleston Meadows on neighbors saying that they do not want to consider an underpass, and I would disagree with that. I think we need to have more information and more evaluation on that. I do hear some comments that people are saying that they are interested in the viaduct. I think that the members that are on the committee, I'm not sure that you're on the actual Park Boulevard or on Alma. So I really hope that the committee members will take into consideration the people who are the closest to those streets, because it definitely impacts and the look of it. So the viaduct is not something that I would like us to consider. But I would like to get more information on the underpass. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephanie. We have one more speaker coming up, and that's Deborah. Deborah, you may begin to speak now. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, I sent a letter earlier, and I'm sorry to be redundant if you've already read it, but I don't know if you've had an opportunity to read it. What I said in my letter is that it's come to my attention when I spoke to you at your last meeting, and I was saying, I don't understand why the consultant is saying it won't be louder to have the viaduct than it would be to put the train underground. And I said, just from common sense and my personal experience, I hear the train so much louder on the second story of my home than I do on the ground level. And it finally made sense to me when I realized that they were only looking at the first supposedly two rows of houses, but really in our neighborhood, there's only one row of houses. The second across the street is all broken up by streets going the other direction. But in any case, we live in a one-story overlay neighborhood, and I think the assumption the consultant was using was that two-story homes would block the noise from the raised train. And apparently they never came into our neighborhood because there's a single-story overlay. I live in one of the very few two-story houses, and I'm closer to Wilkie than I am to Park. So the information in there does not reflect the reality of our neighborhood. And also, I definitely feel strongly that we need a different financial assessment of the different alternatives, because it seems that other communities have been able to build trench or tunnel projects faster and at a much lower rate. And I don't understand where these numbers come from, but they don't look accurate. So I just wanted to make sure that you had seen my letter and that these points were in front of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deborah. We do not have any more speakers for this agenda. Nadia.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for your comments. So we do release every week the list of comments that we've gotten. So you should be able to check the packet every week. And unless you sent it pretty close to when the meeting is, you should be able to see that we have received your comments, for those of you that are wondering. I did want to address, we've had several speakers say that they were not contacted by the city. And I just wanted to make really clear, and I want to give the city a chance to respond. My understanding is at this very early level of engineering, nobody's being contacted about anything because the lines are on the map are extremely fluid. It isn't until the city really goes to a much deeper level of design that they can even really understand which properties are being impacted. I think when this, specifically when the underpass idea first surfaced, it was surfaced, even XCAP didn't get to see it. It came up actually at a public meeting. And I think the day prior, there was an effort made by the city to try to alert as many properties as they had figured out may be impacted. But Philip, if you wanted to speak further about that, I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of address that.
Yeah, thank you, Nadia. That's really exactly it. And to address the member of the public that spoke on this item, there was an earlier iteration of the project. It's evolved a bit since that time, but at the time there was an effort by the city to get out messages to all of the properties that could be impacted, and that's when we received some feedback from those properties that, either were identified or thought that their properties were nearby to the impact. So they were, impacted. And I think as the member of the public mentioned, there certainly is opposition from some members of the public to having their properties be discussed as part of the negotiation. So I really want that to be clear to the XCAP, because I think there's been a little bit of a discussion about whether all the properties do want to be acquired or not. I think clearly there are some property owners that would like to retain their properties and stay in the places that they're at. As Nadia said, we wouldn't be notifying property owners of proposed impacts that might not at this point go beyond into an actual, real environmental design phase. So it's really to be determined whether we move into a further state where this is something that could be considered less conceptual and more real. And we could really understand more precisely what property impacts could be associated with the project.
And Philip, this level of engineering, it's 5% level of engineering, roughly. That's kind of what you refer to it from in the engineering world. Highly conceptual.
Yeah. It's 5 or 3 to 5 or something like that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. Any XCAPers? I wanted to leave it open before I know we promised Greg this week we're going to go around, do a round robin so everyone can talk about where they are. But did anybody have anything else that they wanted to kind of respond to after the comments that were heard, or did I need to clarify anything? Did I miss something? I just felt like that we didn't get contacted by the city one was important to touch on.
I have one thing I'd like to talk about.
Sure.
So 2 weeks ago, I presented that chart that showed the different costs and then compared them to the AECOMs. And then last week, staff addressed some of that and provide some reasons why they thought that those were not apples and oranges. And so I went through and scrubbed one of the designs this week, and I want to have a couple slides to show people. So can I share my screen here?
And to the members of the public, we'll make sure that whatever Keith is about to show, we will post on the website so we can all see it, because we're all seeing it real time for the first time.
Okay. Yeah, again, this is mine. It has not been vetted by anyone. Okay. So so when we talked last week, staff said that there are 2 major reasons. One of them being that LA is 20% cheaper than, or Bay Area is 20% more expensive than LA. And that would be a cost differential when you're looking at, for example, the San Gabriel Trench. And the other thing was some cost escalations. So I looked through the data to say, well, what is the cost differential? Okay. And so construction costs, there's different ways of predicting what something's going to cost. ENR publishes 2 indexes. One of them deals with the cost of building a building where you need carpenters and other highly skilled labor. And the other is more general construction where the laborers are less highly skilled and less compensated. And if you look at the building costs, yeah, currently Bay Area construction costs are 20% higher for building buildings, not for building general construction. So if you look every month, ENR updates their index. If you look at the current month, the Bay Area for housing is 21% higher. But that's a little deceptive because this summer, the Bay Area has actually boomed quite a bit and construction costs have gone up during the pandemic, whereas in LA, they've gone down quite a bit during the pandemic. But if you look at the 5-year average, this is for building buildings with carpenters, it's 12.4% higher in the Bay Area than in Los Angeles. But now if you just look at the construction costs of general construction, the Bay Area is currently only 7.8% higher than Los Angeles. And that also is a spike recently. If you look at the 3-year average, it's more like 2.8%. And 5-year average is even lower, 2.2%. So if you're looking at, we're building this a couple years down the road at fastest, maybe 10 years down the road, the current spike really is not relevant. It's really what's the long-term average. And you have looked at the escalation over the past 3 years, the Bay Area has increased about 3.2% per year. So if you're using that, that would be a ballpark figure to say how much when we're changing years. So I looked at the Carlsbad Trench. I looked at the previous 2 weeks ago. I looked at a whole bunch of different designs. This week I just looked at one. I just didn't have the time to dig through all of them. But the Carlsbad Trench they have an estimate of their total cost. And that's total cost. That's construction and design and everything. And they add in 30% contingency because it is preliminary. This is not a design that has been built. It's a design that's underway. And all their construction costs were based in 2016. So they escalated from 2016 to 2023. And the subtotal that's in green, that's what they have their final answer in their report. That's what they are planning for. They're planning to pay in 2023 when they start construction. But that's down in San Diego in Southern California. So if you look at the adjustment between Southern California and San Francisco, I'm using 7.8%, and that's a spike, but I'm being generous here and saying, okay, let's multiply by 7.8%. That adds another $20 to $22 million to the construction. That adds it up between $280 and $307 million. And that's in 2023 dollars. So if you escalate at 3.6%, that's what the Bay Area has gone over the last 3 years. That adds another 18 to 20 million to that. So the final adjusted cost, if you take Carlsbad and adjust it in time and from Southern California to San Francisco, you get a total of between 298 and 327. Compare that to AECOM is 800 to 950. It's still huge differential. And there are some things, for example, there may be some specific things like shoe fly tracks. In the hybrid, they said that I think it was 20 million or 25 million for hybrid. So even if it was 25 million for shoe fly tracks, the Carlsbad does have shoe fly tracks, but for some reason that was different. That wouldn't raise the Carlsbad cost by more than 25 million. So now you're still talking nowhere near what AECOM has. And I can't figure out what, there's going to be some differences because they're different situations, but there's nothing in there that would explain why these two estimates are so widely different. And so this is a do or die for the trench, in that if it stays up at 800 to 850, there's going to be a lot of resistance. And so if it's down to 300, we may not choose it, but it's in the ballpark. It's in play. So this is a really critical decision, a really critical piece of data to make our decision. And we can't make a decision on something that has so much uncertainty. So in my mind, there's no way we can make this decision without additional engineering analysis on the trench and say, what is the real cost? So are there questions with this?
Yeah, I do. Keith, this is Tony. I'm glad we got into this issue because it bothered me in around January, February, when we looked at these cost estimates. They seemed high. But then when you go into the other options, they're all about equally high. And so from a decision point of view, it was okay with me because they were all equally inflated, it seemed. But and as I said before, I'm okay with inflating it because we'd rather be surprised on the downside than the upside. That said, I think this issue about not being able to decide is not relevant because they're all comparative and sort of mega costs, sort of looking at them in relation to each other. That I think you'll find these issues consistent through the cost estimate. But I'm saying, I also think that we really need to dive into this because if you look at Berkeley, when it looked at the BART station, BART line through Berkeley, it came down to costs and an overestimate from the BART side. And so bringing that cost down allowed them to go to a tunnel. But yeah, I think I'm glad we should be getting into these costs, but I'm afraid that they're similar all through the options.
But it's different because here we're talking about a factor of 3 almost between the, and so if you look at the hybrid, which is ballpark 300 million, if that was off by a factor of 3, it'd be only 100 million. And so we know that there's not a factor of 3 in the hybrid. So
if you look at the tunnel, Keith, the Hatch-Mott McDonald estimate was about 40% of what AECOM's estimate was. I don't know if they're comparable estimates, but that was the difference. And I think, yeah, AECOM is being cautious. I don't know if they're administrative costs that pump the construction costs so high, but yeah, we should get into this, in my opinion.
But if this was just one design that was off kilter, you could say, oh, those crazy people down in Carlsbad are being too optimistic. But Carlsbad is much more in family with those other trenches that were actually built than AECOM is.
So Keith, I just want to say I appreciate all this, hard work you're doing, looking at these, dollar amounts. I think, first of all, I want to say, I think that the Carlsbad trench, I don't believe includes right-of-way and support costs. So this is construction costs. Second, I think, you used that 20% that I mentioned, which was salaries, and that was a salary difference in 2012. And then you're comparing it to Los Angeles. And I just want to point out that Carlsbad is not in Los Angeles, and it's a lower, it's got a cost differential to Los Angeles even. So I just think, you're trying to get these are not apples to apple comparison, I'm sorry to say. So I hear what Tony's saying as well, that, he thinks that there's an equitable, if there's an overestimate, that there's an overestimate for all of these projects. But I think Ripon and I have taken a look at these numbers with AECOM, and this is why we hired AECOM, was to give us this estimate. And yeah, sometimes estimates can be high, but sometimes they can be low. So I think this is what we feel is a reasonable cost estimate for this project.
But it is so out of family with those other projects. That really bothers me.
So I think it's so out of, it's so different from those if you're not comparing like the full, project. So we can't compare a portion of this project cost to our full project cost. And we can't compare a dollar cost in Carlsbad to the dollar cost in Palo Alto. I mean, they're simply completely different markets.
Well, one of the problems is that ENR doesn't have an index for San Diego. They have a Southern California index. And so if you're trying to...
I understand that, but I can tell you from having lived there for the majority of my life that it's a different labor market than Los Angeles.
Yeah, Carrie, I see Carrie's hand.
Thanks, Keith. I'm sorry I don't have this in front of me to look this up myself, but I was just wondering, can you remind us if the Carlsbad project had the utilities issues and the underground creek rerouting issues? Or if that might, if they don't, if that might explain the difference.
Well, we have a memo to that effect on the agenda for this week that answers those questions, I believe.
About Carlsbad? Okay.
Carlsbad's different than I think.
Oh, it's about San Gabriel. Okay,
Yeah.
well.
Different SoCal place. They're not all the same.
Sorry,
That's
Gregory.
all.
Thank you for mentioning it, but I was like, it's not
Sorry, there's Disneyland, and that's pretty much what's done there.
Something
yeah.
that's not here.
Sorry. Okay.
But it's fine. We can talk about whichever one. But it specifically as to why it's different, those are things I was thinking. I wonder if they are having to deal with, because that would certainly affect the cost significantly.
I mean, but if you go to the doctor, if one of your loved ones has an issue, and you go in and the doctor gives you advice that doesn't seem right, what do? Do you just accept what that doctor tells you, or do you get a second opinion?
Oh, Keith, I'm not questioning your right to bring this up. I was just trying to ask if those would add to help explain the difference.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, there is a lagoon down in Carlsbad, and I'm not sure how much that gets in. But again, that's not an apples to apples. They don't have anything equivalent to Matadero Creek or to Adobe Creek. So it's hard to find apples to apples perfectly. But still, this is a 6,000-foot trench, and we're building a 6,000-foot trench. You think they would be in the ballpark and not off by a factor of 3. I can't believe any site-specific differences are going to cause that large of a discrepancy.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions for Keith? Yeah. I did want to acknowledge that In Young came earlier and started with this discussion. I did just see her hand go up, so I'm going to give it to In Young.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I let you know.
The only thing that I can think of, and I'm not sure this is a very good answer, Phil, is the soil conditions may be different, and the fact that there's an active railroad right-of-way for which service has to be maintained could also be a cost driver for us.
No,
just guessing.
Yeah, they have to have shoe fly tracks. They are constructing shoe fly tracks. They have to they lose some parking lots because they move the shoe fly tracks, just like we would lose Lane of Alma.
Yeah. Possibly the soil conditions, because we're an earthquake country, and the water table and just the ground itself is pretty lousy.
Yeah. Carlsbad has a high water table too, so they have the same.
All right,
issues
again,
we do.
I'm just guessing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're asking, constructing a trench in the middle of Manhattan might be more expensive than constructing a trench in the desert. I mean, I'm being a pain in the butt, but where it's located does make a difference. The dump trucks have to drive in and out through Palo Alto and go, I don't know where, to dump the stuff. So there are a lot of reasons why there could be a difference, but
yeah, but it may not explain a threefold difference. I mean,
I have no idea.
I'm shocked by that, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think we shouldn't be in a position, and Inge, I see your hand, I'll get to you right now. I think it's not fair to be in a position for all of us to guess why there's such a big difference. I think it is notable there's a big difference, but and I think that's what Keith is saying.
Again, I want to emphasize that the threefold difference is not full cost. I don't believe we're talking about a full cost for this Carlsbad project in comparison to what we're estimating as a full cost for the Palo Alto project. So I think if you want to look at just construction, the Palo Alto project is around 500 million.
But again, Carlsbad is in family with Reno and San Gabriel, right? And in family with Sky Harbor too. So all these trenches have roughly the same cost.
And not escalated, and they're not apples to apples projects. So I know that, as we discussed before, the Reno project was used for the cost estimate for the Palo Alto trench.
But this cost escalation is not going to explain a factor of 3.
I did want to give In Young has got her hand up, Keith.
Yeah,
you can't see her, so go ahead.
I think you can't really guess it. And then, there's a time difference. There is we have to trust the the consultants that we hired, and if we can't trust them, then why did we hire it, right? And then because I understand you, because you're say 3, and then even if the estimate is lower or whatever, by the time we want to build this thing, it might change. So it's just the magnitude of the estimate, right? That's why it's called estimate, right?
So I'm sorry.
So I think that we should just go with estimate. I don't think, I mean, what's the point getting another estimate, right? Because they might be not accurate either, right? So you can go on and argue.
Then why did we have XCAP? If we're going to just trust what AECOM does, we should just have them choose the rail crossing for us.
Well, I'm not saying
that's effectively what they've done by having this $800 to $950 million. They effectively have vetoed the trench. And if we really trust them that much, then they could have just chosen it for us, not go through the charade of XCAP.
Yeah, I did not trust it. So I actually Googled, and a lot of estimate. I mean, I seen a lot of actual price of the trenches and underpasses in New York and around the world. I haven't looked at it, and I think they were going to some sort of reasonable estimate. That was my impression. I did look, I mean, I was appalled, like $1 billion for whatever, like mile, and I just, appalled. And I looked at it, I think it looked like, they're actually about the same price that New York spent a few years ago or whatever years ago, they put that same number, and I.
Yeah, for the Second Avenue subway.
So I saw Greg, you wanted to say something, and then I saw Tony's hand.
So I'm trying to understand, I think the purpose for us, let's imagine that the $800 million AECOM trench is a $400 million someone else trench. Does that mean that our $400 million viaduct is now a $200 million viaduct, and that our $200 million hybrid is a $100 million hybrid?
Right.
If so, then I'm not sure that really changes our deliberations. If it turns out that it's a $400 trench and a $500 million viaduct, that might change our deliberations.
Well, to be fair, the retired civils that we talked to, their general feeling was that the above ground items were underpriced and the below ground items were overpriced. And so the question is, are they more in the middle? So if the trenches goes from 800 million to 400 million, but the hybrid goes from 200 to 400 and everybody's at 400, then what do we want? And I think that's kind of the point that Keith is really driving at, is that some may be undercosted, some may be overcosted, but if the numbers all kind of coalesce around the middle, does that change the answer? And I think that's what's a tougher question for everybody. And we can certainly debate. I mean, we can all go through the assumption of like, okay, if everything had the same price, then what?
Yeah, well, maybe we should do that. But I mean, looking at this, I mean, we have numbers and data from AECOM and an explanation of why it's different. We have some numbers and data from Keith. That's all we actually know right now.
Yep.
So if there are other people in town who you've spoken to who want to look at what Tony looked at and come up with their own independent estimates, then we can continue to have the process run, I suppose.
Tony, I saw your hand.
Yes, I did these calculations for the tunnel because that was my favorite thing for many years. And I used Hatchmont McDonald's cost estimate, and their cost estimate showed that it was around 1.2 billion for the entire length of Palo Alto. AECOM's number was about 3.2 billion. But I see that all of them are inflated in that manner. And maybe that Hatchmont McDonald's costs were just construction costs and did not include all of the administrative costs. So there are discrepancies in these costs. They're generally, if you look at hard costs, what we call actual construction costs, it's about 3 times all the way through each alternative, is in my opinion. But I think drilling into these costs are really pretty important and critical, and I'm glad Keith has looked at it. I'd like to help with Keith actually, once it comes down to looking at these in more detail. Thanks.
I did want to say that part of the reason these costs are as ambiguous as they are is because we have so many outstanding questions from Caltrain, right? And so that also drives the ambiguity. I will just note that, you know, if we were doing this after Caltrain did their long range study of grade separations, you might have more refined estimates. And I think that's part of the concern here. But I do want to, Tony, you're saying that this would be, if everything's inflated by 3, that would make the hybrid somewhere around 65 million, which I don't think is likely either. So
I don't think I'm not sure if they're all inflated by 3.
Right.
But
that's-
they're high costs, and I don't know exactly why they're higher than other actually contractors.
Well, I think it's fair that are not going to know the cost, and we have to work with what we have. Larry, yes.
Well, I'm concerned about this. We're dealing with things that are really not knowable at this point. And I would like to hear the staff's detailed response. And I understand where Philip's coming from, so I don't expect him necessarily to agree with Keith. But I do have to say to Keith that on the San Gabriel one, I was pretty much satisfied with the report that staff gave in response to your report, the one that they just gave, that we just today, I guess. And in my analysis, I said, okay, before your report today, I'll look at these and I will subtract $100 million from the estimates for the San Gabriel, for the trench here. And does that make me have a different opinion? So I think we ought to do the same type of thing here, have staff provide a critique of what Keith has just proposed today. I mean, it's not fair for them to expect, us to expect them to respond right off the top of their heads when they haven't had this beforehand to analyze. So I think we ought to see what staff response is, and then maybe Keith's response to that. But there has to be an end to it. At some point, we have to accept somebody's numbers to move forward. And I don't think we're going to get any better data until you do lots and lots of engineering, not just the response from Caltrain. So I'm willing to go another round of Keith coming up with the report and staff responding to it and then seeing where we are. But after that, I would expect to have to, I would want us to move forward to reach a recommendation.
Yeah, thanks. And I think I just want to say that I think it's unlikely that at this level of design that any of these cost estimates are going to get shifted. I mean, the reality is what happens is you do some undergrounding, you find out there's, utility conflicts, or you find out other, issues, and that's when cost estimates change. I just want to share with the group in case you're not really familiar with the Coastal Express, the Carlsbad area, just to share kind of what the area looks like where this service occurs, because it's very different from Palo Alto. So if it pleases the group, I'll share with you just kind of where the project's supposed to start. And Keith, maybe you have this better on hand, but if not, I'll.
Well, Philip, you want to, maybe it would be worth saving it till you have like a full rebuttal, because I think, to Larry's point, it'd be better for you guys to kind of think through.
Well, I guess so. I'm not feeling that. I mean, so next week we can come back with a presentation on the Carlsbad one, and then the week after we're going to do one on a different one. I really don't see what the end result of this is going to be and how it's going to help. I think our response to the Carlsbad is going to be the same one that we gave today, that it's not apples to apples. We're just not, we hired AECOM to do cost estimates for us. We feel that they did a good job. Yeah, there's potential to save. There's also potential that it could cost more. That's why these are estimates at this time.
I agree with Philip in that I don't think any reply that he has next week is going to settle this. There's still going to be this uncertainty. And the question is, what do we do as a panel with uncertainty? And I think a reasonable approach is to say, let's wait for Caltrain. And when Caltrain gets its final data, we'll revisit the costing of the trench and say, what would, given maybe change constraints that Caltrain has, we will now recost the trench. And at that point, council will have to make the decision on what would be the best approach. Because there's so much uncertainty in the trench, it affects our decision. The uncertainty of the hybrid and the viaduct are much less.
And so, Keith, in your mind, if I'm reading you correctly, what you've said is basically because we're waiting from Caltrain to hear some technical answers about that may or may not help us clear the creeks, which could then significantly change that cost piece of it.
Correct.
That is really kind of the biggest driver, and that you feel like that would come as a result of the Caltrain grade set process, or certainly we could ask it, and that might help us understand whether it makes this easier.
Because anything that we choose here is not going to be built anytime soon. Almost certainly we will wait for the Caltrain study, and then that will color our recommendation. It may change our recommendation entirely depending on what Caltrain comes up with. So if that's the situation that we have, why would we have Philip go back and crank away at these updated estimates when they're just still going to be estimates?
Right. And I just want to emphasize, I don't think there's anything that I'm going to look at over this next week, or even if you gave me several months, that's going to make me come back and say, oh, these trench costs can be reduced by threefold. I mean, that's just not, I don't think that's likely. And I think that's the costs that we're comparing them to are not in line, not equivalent. So I don't think that's it's possible.
I don't think this is a 2-week answer. Yeah.
I don't think it's. You mentioned our volunteer civil engineers and how they said that they thought that the cost estimate might be too high for the underground alternatives. But my recollection is they also said that you have more uncertainties once you start going beneath the ground, that you're likely to find more surprises there than when you're going above ground.
I would agree. I think one of the other things that they really talked about was the fact that we cannot, one person in particular who had the most experience actually building grade separations actually said that what is sort of nonsensical about what we're doing is that this has to be, all these projects have to be grouped together. And so looking at them as each individual thing and thinking that there's a price or a number for each of those grade separations is not quite how these things are done. So, I mean, yes to what you're saying, Larry, but they also sort of like, I don't even know why you guys are doing it this way, because this isn't really how these things are done. And I would say that Caltrain's proposed now, hey, we better look at this as a corridor, is a testament to what that person was saying, which is like that's where they feel like now it makes more sense for them to do that, because they're no longer at a point where it's grade separation by grade separation. Okay, well, so Keith, what I'm hearing from you is you're uncomfortable moving forward because you still have questions about that part of the process. I did want to keep my promise to allow us to be able to do a round robin of kind of checking in where everybody is and you know, how are folks feeling about moving forward with all the uncertainties that we have, and allowing everyone to kind of speak on that and how comfortable they are. Tony, your hand is up. Did you have something before I do that? No? Okay, your hand is up digitally. So, okay, I'm going to go in the order of my windows on my monitor to just check in. And I guess I've written out a proposed question for everybody, which is, you know, do you have a first choice right now and why? And if you have a close second and want to discuss it, you can go for it. If you have a distant second and want to discuss it, that's fine too. But just kind of that's the general tone. I think, Greg, I have you first in my boxes. You went last week, but if you wanted to give it a go again, I wanted to give you first chance, and then you can set the tone.
Whether I'm Bobby or whether I'm Marcia. So yeah.
No, that's we can do this though.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's okay with me if XCAP goes on forever, but I can't have it every week, and I can't have it till 3:30 in the afternoon. There are a lot of uncertainties. I don't know when the uncertainties are going to be over. One thing that does seem to be certain when I look at other projects around the world, I've been Googling viaduct construction, because if we're all going to have our favorite option, we're all going to do research on our favorite option and find one in the world that was done cheaply. I found some $20 million viaducts out there, by the way. So I would love, don't worry, I don't believe that it's comparable. I'm just saying. I I feel like we need to have a preferred alternative so it's frustrating too, because with all the public pressure on this, I think it's unlikely the council is going to do whatever we recommend anyway. And they certainly were making some noises in the meeting along that line as well. And we don't know who's going to be on the council. So I feel like we need to report clearly on what we see as the pros and cons and all of the things we learned in the duration of this project. But if we really want this project to work at all, the peninsula is going to have to get together and approach it in a coordinated way. Even if we come up with an option that we think realistically would only cost $200 million, and we do have one of those, by the way, for Meadow and Charleston. Palo Alto doesn't have $200 million. Measure O for the schools is something like $15 million a year, and it's going to take a townwide effort to pass that.
But we do have potentially 350 million in Measure B. I just want to.
Right, we have that, and that's about the only money we know we have. The federal government is not rushing to give California money, and that may not change in November. Sacramento is not rushing to give Palo Alto money. That may not change for a long time. Santa Clara County is, Measure RR is, I don't know what the polling is on that, but if we need Measure RR, and judging from the public comments, I don't hear strong support in this community for Caltrain either. So I'm very concerned that we're not going to do anything at all. And that's why I spent a lot of time writing that public safety chapter about, according to the FRA, the estimation of there being at least one grade crossing accident in Palo Alto every year for the foreseeable future. And many of those impacting cars that still have people in them when the train hits them. So I think my feeling is still biased on what we could actually do that would actually eliminate grade crossings, increase safety, and by the way, incidentally, remove the noise of the train horns, which is the vast, vast majority of the noise that people are hearing outside their homes when they live near the tracks. So all of that leads me to continue to think that the logical solution is the hybrid. If we go back to the dynamic matrix, the main disadvantage of the hybrid that we've been able to factually determine is that people have to see it. If we look at it, it is, for instance, it actually in some cases reduces the noise because it acts as a barrier between Alma Street and cars and houses that are on the other side of Alma Street. And in general, we're talking about replacing diesel trains that honk their horn at every grade crossing 4 times with electric trains that don't. The differences in noise between a hybrid and trench and viaduct are going to be, according to our noise report, almost impossible to tell. So to me, the hybrid is the most logical choice. However, the viaduct would sit farther away from homes. And it sounds like there's not a real reason why Caltrain would say no to that until the 4-track question comes up. And then we can start all our deliberations all again if that happens. The viaduct also reduces vibration significantly compared to all the other alternatives. The viaduct also, I just looked at the noise report again, actually has less construction noise than the hybrid. So people who are concerned with noise should think about the noise they're going to hear during construction. The hybrid takes less time. Oh God, the viaduct reduces construction noise, and the viaduct takes less time to build, and it's farther away from houses. So
the viaduct less time to build than which one?
Than the hybrid. I think the viaduct takes less time to build than the hybrid. I think the viaduct is quieter during construction than the hybrid. I think the viaduct is farther on average from the homes near the tracks than any of the options. The viaduct separates the road from the rails. The main disadvantages of the viaduct are the visual impact, and the other disadvantage being that it's a lot more expensive than the hybrid. I still believe a trench is more expensive than a hybrid. A viaduct is more expensive than a hybrid, and it's likely that a trench is more expensive than a viaduct. Cost matters. So I am right on the fence between, if I had to make a recommendation right now, between the viaduct and the hybrid, because I'm very strongly in favor of the option that will cost the least amount of money that we'll be able to actually build in Palo Alto in order to eliminate the dire safety problem we have here. And that's the end of my soliloquy. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Let's see, my next one is In-Young and then Dave.
Okay, so I think none of these options are very welcoming of, from our community. And my preference is trench first, underpass, and viaduct. Because viaduct is, you know, people same. I mean, I concur the people who live near on Park and, you know, on Armad, you know, it's gonna disrupt their views and disrupt their lives, and I think it's really unfair. I mean, if they're gonna build it, they should buy the whole property. Otherwise, I think it's unforgivable to put this viaduct. And this is not just for the neighborhood, but also the people who, you know, people living in Palo Alto. It just, you know, it's just gonna destroy the feel of the community and look of our, you know, beautiful community. So I'm really against the viaduct. Underpass, I like the idea because it's, although there's a raised part of the track and all that, so it's disturbing, but I think, you know, I'm putting above on viaduct. And the reason I put a second to the trench is because, you know, there's eminent domain and they're taking people's house. And I think that's also very unfair.
So I just want to ask you, you said that on the underpass, it's not, there's nothing raised in the underpass alternative.
Train is a little bit raised, no?
No, we talked about that as a potential to fix some of the bike ped stuff, but in the current alternative, it doesn't.
Okay, then it's a better. So, you know, I think
I just wanted to, no, there's no need to justify. I just wanted to make sure that you knew that because I think it's.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm kind of confused. I'm like,
no, it's okay.
I'm looking at the underpass. I think I'm kind of, you know, because the last underpass with the bike pass and stuff, it's really confusing.
Yes,
So
it feels
yeah.
the perspective makes it look that way. Yep.
All right. So then, thank you for correcting that. And, you know, this eminent domain. So I put it like a trench. It's very expensive, but we don't even know it's going to be really expensive, not expensive. I mean, it's expensive, but I mean, all of these are expensive. So are we going to put an investment on this? Maybe we should put money on and, you know, find the solution that we can live with. But trench is also a problem because, you know, duration of construction and disturbing, you know, the fruit fly and all these other things is also very disturbing as well. But just, you know, not thinking about the money, you know, from these three, I think the people like the trench the most. So I put in a number one.
Okay. Dave, followed by Carrie.
Thanks. First, I really don't like eminent domain. I really respect those who've spoken about losing their homes and not wanting to move. So whatever option that we choose, ultimately, that's something I'd love to see. The other one is I'm going to get on my soapbox for a second and say, wow, if $500 million or $1 billion dropped in Palo Alto's lap, would we spend it on rail? What if we could give it and do something else with it? That's where, like, I just, the sheer amount of that money that could be put to other good use. Instead, we're going to go and build some rail and roads and stuff with it. Anyway, I'm going to step off my soapbox now. So anyway, actually, Greg said it great because, you know, I think the best, oh, sorry, I'm skipping around a bit. With respect to data that we don't have, like the costs and stuff, I mean, I think the best we can do here at XCAP is to get lean, right? It's like, what are you leaning towards? And a lot of people keep saying, oh, we're going to make a decision now. It's like, and that's not true though. And I think that's use of that language is coloring what people's perception is about, even in potentially ourselves, right? We keep saying it to ourselves, we go, decision, decision, decision. Like, no, wait, it's not a decision. It's nothing like that. So the best we can do is a lean towards something given what we know. And if we don't know it, let's acknowledge it. If we don't know what the cost of the trench and all these things are, then let's acknowledge it. I'm not sure we should keep spending another couple weeks, like as Phil and even Keith has recognized, like talking about it when we can't really finalize decision. It just costs us in time, us here sitting in this room. And so, sorry, now getting back to what Greg said, because he said it great. Because out of all those options that are there, I think the lean, therefore, for me is towards the hybrid. It seems like it, yeah, we're raising the tracks a little, but I think every single option has negatives to it. And I think that what we're going to end up choosing is the one that's the least negative. And to me, like, that's what the hybrid delivers. And that's also still a lean, right? There's still so many unknowns out of this. But out of this XCAP process, if you were asking me to lean in some direction right now, it'd probably be the hybrid for a lot of the reasons that that Greg was actually kind enough to deliver before me. So thank you very much.
Do you have a second lean?
No, the other ones, I think just more work, right? Whether it's costs or even the underpass may have some promise, but you know, that's a lot of eminent domain in it the way it is done now, right? So I think it still requires a lot more work. But if I were to choose, like, let's say in an imaginary world that things were stuck right now, this is it. This is what the engineers are going with. I mean, right, that the lean is still towards hybrid. And yeah, I really don't have a second right now.
Okay.
Thanks.
Sure. Carrie, followed by Phil.
I agree a lot with what Greg and Dave said. I'm struggling with the process because we have so many open questions, and I don't feel like we've had the depth of discussion on the Charleston and Meadow alternatives that we did on Churchill, and that bothers me too. I think that some of the alternatives are underdeveloped, and that would make it hard for us to choose because we would be faced with less information on one of the choices and might eliminate it prematurely. You know, my gut here is to refer to our matrix and try and use that. And we haven't even had a discussion on, you know, come to a consensus on how each of these rates, right? We've kind of brought over the original information from staff, but we haven't gone through and said, yes, we think these are the right ratings for each of the choices. Looking through it now, just as it is with the information from staff, the hybrid and viaduct have the most beneficial ratings. I don't feel that that matches what we've heard from the public. So I do think it warrants more discussion. And I do think that the underpass is promising, but currently problematic. So we may need more work on that. So I'm not feeling that we're, you know, a week or two away from coming to a good recommendation on these two crossings.
You think it's longer, just to be very clear.
Yes,
Yeah.
I do.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
I don't want to leave any ambiguity there.
And then that circles back to what Greg said. You know, I question the rush, because I know we've been working on these for a long time, but if we're not ready, what good will be a rushed decision without all the information, or at least the appropriate information to make a recommendation? So that's where I'm coming from. I feel pretty uncomfortable with this. I use these crossings all the time, so I do feel that we do have some voices down here on this side of town that are familiar with it and what the impacts might be. We're hearing some good public comments starting over the past 3-4 weeks, specifically focused on this part of town. So I think we're getting there, but I don't think we're as close as maybe you think we are. And I'm also concerned about the pace. I just, if we don't have a chance to sit down and study it and write our thoughts and our chapters, I'm concerned. Like, I don't know. And I don't think every week is working out. I think it's causing us to rush.
Okay. Thank you for that, Carrie.
Yeah. Did you want me to, is that sufficient, or do I need to pick one?
I think if you want to state if you've got a first and a second, fine, but
I don't. I don't. I mean, there's a lot of questions that were brought up by Keith's presentation as well that make me wonder if I need to pay closer attention to that as a viable option, which I had previously thought it was not as viable.
Do you have a first lean, as Dave puts it?
I really don't like these options.
We're all sort of in the same.
Well, and that's the question really is, are we going to put ourselves in a situation of, stack ranking it and presenting it as a stack rank? Because I think that is much more likely to happen than for us to make a recommendation, right? That of one. And it's a totally different way of presenting it. And I think that was something that we hoped to do, but we did not necessarily accomplish in previous iterations.
I mean, I, for one, would be happy to do stacked ranked, but I've sort of been that way the whole time. So I think we'll have to hear from others how they feel about that. But
yeah, I would love to hear from others.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Phil and then Tony.
Ouch. So a while ago, I think before we went to virtual meetings, Ed Chikata said something like these alternatives all have their issues, and there's no there's no obvious choice. And if it was true then, it's still true now. So it's kind of like the least bad or the least offensive. So if costs were not an issue or the dollars were not what they are, I'd probably like to trench because it has issues, but it means the least disruption to the existing roadways ultimately, and the least disruption to the community ultimately. But cost is an issue and the numbers are pretty bad. And I mean, I appreciate what Keith is doing. I think it's very important what he's doing, but I don't think we're going to somehow find any gold-plated rabbits in that hat. So when I think about the underpass, I was very enthusiastic about the box jack method for cutting construction costs, but I think the underpass has some really significant issues. Eminent domain is one of them. The lack of some turning movements is another one. And the third is the whole set of issues around bicycle and pedestrian safety. And to be honest, I don't believe that the eminent domain will be restricted to just the 5 or so houses that we think they are now. I think it's going to get a lot bigger once the final design is done. And that worries me. And if all the alternatives had eminent domain issues, then I wouldn't be so upset about this one. But this is the only one that does. And what's one of the public speakers said before, it really resonates with me. We're canceling citizens. And that's, I know there's always the question of, will you make if you sacrifice for the many, but I don't know if there's enough money to pay those people to get their lives disrupted, short of building them custom homes on city-owned land, which probably won't happen. So when I think about the two elevated alternatives, the hybrid and the viaduct, the viaduct has some advantages over the hybrid because it disrupts the roadways a lot less. But there's a very emotional issue of a viaduct structure. It's not just the visuals of the fact that it's only 10 or whatever feet higher than a hybrid. It's the visual of a viaduct and people thinking about freeway overpasses or the Chicago Loop or the L's in New York, or whatever. And we've already seen from the various town halls, very visceral reaction against the viaduct. And I don't think we could get that through the voters, to be honest. And I'm not sure I would like that if I lived closer to the tracks. And I grew up in New York with L structures, so I kind of know where I'm speaking here. That kind of leaves the hybrid, and the hybrid isn't perfect, but to me, it's the lean. It does offer some better soundproofing because it's a solid structure. Maybe it can be tweaked a little bit by playing around the height of the rail, the height of the road, but it's the least awful alternative. And that doesn't mean I'm happy with it.
Okay. Do you feel like, Carrie, that we're really rushing towards a decision?
Yes.
Okay.
You know, one thing we might do, and this is just a suggestion, particularly in light of what you said earlier about that this whole issue won't be taken up with the current council, with the next council, is what if we said, okay, let's get that report written. And then let's all of us look at that report and read that report and then make these decisions. And by the way, possibly revisiting Churchill.
Okay.
Because we're going on, you know, we're all going on very imperfect information as opposed to the information that we can study with a common knowledge base, meaning the written reports. Now, that all said, I'm concerned about burnout, including my own personal burnout. And I'm beginning to feel like, you know, this may sound a little weird. I'm not sure I'll be alive when these damn things are built. And I'm not that old. I'm old. Yes, I'm old enough to be retired, but I'm not that old. But I'd like to see something that we select or that we recommend to council that has a decent chance of getting voter approval. That means that emotional issues, visual issues are important, and it means the cost is very important.
So, Phil, do you think that from what I'm hearing you say is, let's write some more stuff out and see if that helps us deliberate further? Is it really an issue of deliberation, or is it that you feel like we're really missing some key answers on technical things and we may not get there? And so Carrie proposed, for example, a stacked ranking.
Yeah, well, so I'm doing chapter 4, which is an amazing amount of detail.
Yes.
That is available to me, but not to everybody else unless you read it. And if everybody had chapter 4 in its final form, I feel like we could do a study session, so to speak, on chapter 4. And that might clarify some issues, or at least it might help us to explain, to give it, make it easy for us to give arguments to council when we do, when we do study sessions with them. By the way, I'm thinking out loud on this. I mean, this is not what I intended to say an hour ago.
It's okay, but how do you feel about the stacked rank concept, I guess?
I think it's a fine idea, but based on what? What information are we stacking or ranking this? Ranking alternative.
I think what Carrie means, and I'll let Carrie clarify, but I think the stacked rank is really about, you know, well, we don't have all the information and we can't come to a single decision. So this is how we're ranking them based on what we know.
No, I know what I'm trying to say though is what we know now is not what we might know in a few weeks when we've all read each other's chapters.
Okay.
And you know, and I realized, and I would be really upset if AECOM or if, say, council suddenly said, well, we're just disbanding you, we're going to go with AECOM. That would really upset me. We've all put in way too much work and blood and sweat here. And I'm sorry if I'm emoting a little bit.
It's okay. Emotions are allowed. In fact, they're encouraged.
Well, all right. So you just got mine.
Okay.
All right. I'll mute now.
Thank you, Phil. So Tony and then Larry.
I want to speak to Carrie's question first about the amount of information that we have and the ability for us to make decisions at this point. I sort of think that if we can use Carrie's matrix and score it, and people have said no to this before, so I won't harp on it for much longer. But if we can use that matrix and give it some kind of ranking, the outcome or the choice will be clear. Will be clearer than just debating it, although this is not a bad second to Carrie's matrix. Sorry, I want to talk about the trench first. I think the part that worries me is the siphoning. The costs is a second, or almost as equal to that. But what really worries me most of all is the 5 to 6 years of construction. I mean, we're building this during gridlock, and it's not easy to do that. It's really, really difficult. That means that we're going to be even more gridlocked than normal. Now, we have not costed out, and we've decided that it's not customary to cost out private costs, the costs, externalities that get pushed out to the private sector due to delays. It does not cost out, I don't think, the costs of city administering this project or policing it. And I think the longer it takes, the higher those costs become. And so that worries me considerably. There are issues related to the underpass. The underpass, the first problem, like Dave has, that I have, as well as the takings. But I think there are several other options on this underpass, and that can alleviate some of the takings and can really make it a pleasant, good, beautiful place to place rather than an ugly place. And now going to the, really regarding the box jack, I don't know, some worries about whether Caltrain will approve a box jack or whether they will require shoe fly tracks. The bikes and peds also are not as great in this option because they have to go underground. It's best to keep bikes and peds on grade and flat. The hybrid, to me, is the ugliest of all these versions. It has walls both going down and going up, and I can't see that as being much better than the trench, because it takes almost as long to construct this hybrid. Now, talking about the viaduct, I think it has the least time, which is a big benefit from the way I look at it. If it can, the biggest problem with this viaduct is we don't know where it is and we don't know what it'll look like. I think we really need to look at that issue. About 80% of the people who comment on this is it's ugly. Now it's ugly really ugly for about 52 properties, people who live in properties along that right of way. At the tapering ends of that 52 lot string, the viaduct goes down less than 6 feet and tapers down gradually. So it's a small number, not the whole 52 people who really get affected by that, but it's more like 30 or 35. Now, in my view, that this visual issue can be modified with clarity in where this viaduct is going to be located. My suggestion to XCAP is that we locate it at a 45-degree, further than a 45-degree angle, starting at the property line and going up 45 degrees and to the top of the sound wall. So none of this would be within any, would not be any different than if there was a house behind this property. The daylight plane then should work as is described in the zoning ordinance. My estimate is that that's going to be about 25 feet away from that property line. If it's 25 feet away, we can plant trees there subject obviously to Caltrain, and that makes the viaduct disappear. But we really need drawings and a little more accuracy about where these trees could be planted and also where the viaduct is. From bikes and peds, it's flat, and I like that. The downside is that to cross Alma, but they do that already. And it's a good education for kids, I think, to understand how to cross in an urban area. So that I have a preference, and my preference, if I look at costs, is the viaduct, because it's only 2 years duration for construction, is probably the least cost. And so that's my favorite. The second favorite is the underpass, because I think there's a lot of potential there, but it's not great as shown now.
Okay. Thank you, Tony. Larry, and then Keith.
Well, let me start by reiterating a couple of things that we've been saying to ourselves throughout this. The first, most important one is that there are no good solutions. But we wrestle with that because I think that's sort of contrary to human nature, at least my understanding of it. We much prefer to have something that we're really enthusiastic about, that you can say, I really like this solution because, hey, it's going to accomplish lots and lots of good things for our community. Well, we don't have any one of those, so it makes it hard, I think, psychologically for us. And I think it's why we keep grasping for the idea that there's some additional information which would really help us. And I can understand that, but I don't think that the additional information exists. There's nothing that's going to turn any of these alternatives into some type of magic solution that Palo Alto is always going to be famous for. I don't think that so I think that when we talk about wanting to get more information, what we're really doing is expressing our frustration that there's not a better alternative out there, even though intellectually we know that there isn't. And when I look at all these alternatives, the factors that most stand out to me are cost, whether there are property takings involved, the aesthetics, and as Tony has just pointed out, time of construction. And let me talk a little bit about cost. Several of us have talked about it. My take on it is that there are only basically two sources of funding for whatever we choose, whatever the city ultimately chooses. And one is the city itself, meaning our taxpayers, and two is the rest of the world, whether it's the county or regional government or the federal or whatever. To any of the external sources, we have to make an argument as to why we would be choosing something other than what looks to be the least expensive choice. The idea that we're going to get some external source to fund a more grandiose project, I think, is wishful thinking. So I think the best we could do would be to say if the city chose an alternative other than the least expensive, the external sources would say, well, we'll fund you on the basis of the least expensive. And if you want to do something in addition to that, you've got to tax yourselves to come up with the other money. And I think that helps me think about what we want to do in these situations. Because I think that when we're talking to an external source, for example, we may have various other things that we want to ask for. And one of our citizens today brought up the long ago issue, almost 60 years ago now, of the Oregon Expressway. The I wasn't here then, and I don't think anybody here, I know nobody else here was. Tony would be the only other possibility, but I don't think you were here then, Tony. No. Anyway, the city, as I read the history, was able to negotiate a series of improvements to the Oregon Expressway with the county, because that is a county road. Once the decision had been made that we go with that sort of least cost alternative. And I think that we ought to keep that in mind, that when Tony, for example, points about ways to improve the aesthetics of either the hybrid or the viaduct, that we may be in a better position if that's where we've been all along as to what our preferred alternative is. So as I went through the alternatives, rather than looking for starting out with what I think was best, I worked the other way around. What was I left with if I went from the bottom? Which ones did I eliminate first? To me, the easiest one to eliminate was the partial underpass. And I recognize that we were all enthusiastic. I was certainly when we first heard about it. But the more we got into it, the more problems it has. And I don't think the additional work is going to resolve those problems. If there were some really great ideas as to how that could be salvaged, why haven't they come forward? I think that we're not going to find them because the consultant couldn't think of them. Our citizens who brought forth the idea at first couldn't think of them. Nobody on this committee has been able to think of them. So I think that that trying to delay things for additional work on the partial underpass is would be a waste of time, frankly. The trench has a certain amount of appeal to me. And I can understand why some of the neighbors like it, but I don't think that the cost is we can justify either to the voters in Palo Alto or to an external source. And it really doesn't make too much difference to me whether the extra cost is 200 million or 300 million or 500 million. I don't think we can justify it. And I also want to bring up, I think it has more environmental problems. And I worry about what, as I recall, the volunteer civil engineers told us that with the two creeks that have to be dealt with there, that we may really have some unfortunate surprises. So that gets me to the viaduct and the hybrid. And I won't repeat what Greg said, because basically I agree with what he stated, that I think that the hybrid makes more sense. My only problem with it is that it would take 4 years rather than the 2 years of the viaduct to construct. That bothers me, but the savings of a couple $100 million, I think, speaks more loudly. And I think that it's also, while not beautiful, I would rather live with the hybrid than I would with the viaduct. So if you want a 1-2 ranking for me, Nadia, it would be hybrid and then a viaduct.
Oh, thank you, Larry. Keith.
Okay, as you know, I live in Charleston Meadows, and our neighborhood is full of these single-story Eichlers with these floor-to-ceiling windows. And because of that, the city has decided to protect the neighborhood and made it a single-story overlay. And that means that you cannot build a 2-story house in our neighborhood to protect your neighbor's privacy and your neighbor's quality of life. And so given that zoning constraint, it'd be so hypocritical for the city to endorse a elevated rail structure that effectively does the same thing that they're prohibiting private citizens from doing. They would be building a big structure behind the back fence, something that would not be allowed if that area was a house, was at a private land. And that's just hypocritical. I don't know why we're even considering this. And the only reason we should be considering an elevated structure if we have no other alternatives, we do have alternatives. I think, as you've seen, I think that the tunnel is overpriced, and I mean the trench is overpriced, and I think that having another consultant look at it and price it out would give us confidence that either it is higher and all you residents are wrong, or would give us a lower cost that we feel more confident in. So that by far would be my first choice, is to do more work on the trench. And again, we have all these other trenches that are in family, and the one outlier is AECOM, and that just seems very suspicious to me. And it's very upsetting to the neighbors who are seeing, well, why are you not pursuing this? And the bulk of the XCAP is ignoring those concerns. So now, if I have a second choice, well, I don't have both the hybrid and the viaduct are not good options. The current underpass design really stinks. It really does stink. But the underpass, I'm afraid we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because the underpass really is a powerful idea that you're separating the vehicles from the bikes and peds. And remember, in March up at Cal Ave, there was a kid on his bike, a middle school student on his bike, who was run over by a truck that was taking a right turn. And that would not happen if we had separated bikes from vehicles. And the safe routes to school people were not engaged with XCAP. And if they had, they would be very concerned of all these junior high students going up and down Charleston and Meadow and riding right next to vehicles. And if you're talking about bike safety, separating the bikes from the vehicles would be a really smart thing to do at this place. So given that you have this really powerful idea and a bad design, what do you do? Do you just give up, or do you go back and try and say, is there some way to achieve this, take advantage of this powerful design and separate? And particularly the fact that those, the circles have no driveways along Charleston makes it much more feasible than it would be in a lot of other areas. So I really think it may be worth our while, or would be worth our while, to go back and say, can we get a underpass design that doesn't stink? And that has the potential for being the lowest cost. And one of the things that Larry said was, well, we haven't thought of something. Well, talk to Elizabeth and ask her what ideas she would do. She has a whole bunch. I've looked at this, and there's other things that I'd like to try to fit in. And I think we could shrink things down, shrink the lanes, and say, what can we make it work? And there's some iterations that can be. And we're going to have to get the bike people together. We're going to have the neighbors together and say, what would be acceptable? And it won't be easy, but again, the purpose of XCAP is not to make an easy decision, it's to make the best decision. And I think the underpass has potential, and I don't think we've given it a fair shot. So that would be my number 2 choice.
Thank you, Keith. What did you think about Carrie's ranked stacking? It's getting late in the day.
Yeah. Well, like I said earlier, we're not going to be doing anything till after Caltrain. So I think ranking the ideas would be a reasonable thing to do, because after Caltrain is done, we're going to, whoever is around, whether it's the council or whether it's another XCAP, is going to go back and say, what do they recommend and how does that fit in with the current situation? So having a ranking, I think, would be a reasonable thing to do. The problem is that different people have different rankings. And for me, the elevated rail has such a bad ranking that it trumps almost everything. And for other people, they don't. So it's going to be this hodgepodge. And how do you take an average hodgepodge of different strong opinions? I'm not sure.
But are you uncomfortable? Do you feel comfortable making a decision, or are you uncomfortable? So that's what I heard Carrie sort of say. Carrie, correct me if I got that wrong, but I see her nodding her head. Yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty clear in my thinking is that I think we wait till after Caltrain's done, and then assuming when we have the money, we would fund additional trench work and additional underpass work and see, can we make one of those work? And the beautiful thing is that we know we can make the hybrid work. We know the viaduct would work. So these other two are the ones with the biggest upside, but also the biggest uncertainty. And so with some engineering, we could answer whether that does the upside win or the downside win? And if we don't make it work, don't make those work, then we know that we can turn around and go back to the defaults of the hybrid or the viaduct.
Okay.
So I have a decision whether the XCAP has their own different opinions. I'm not sure exactly how to package up our opinions into the most usable summary. That's uncertain for me.
Mm-hmm. Before I go, I did want to, does anybody else, either Greg or Dave or Inyoung, you guys didn't get Carrie's, and maybe even Phil, the stacked ranking. Did you guys want to say anything about that? Yeah, Inyoung.
So because, you know, some people's favors and some other people's least favorite. So I don't think a stack ranking means anything, because when you average it, it's just gonna come out to be the same weight.
Okay, I guess what I'm asking, yeah, I'm just trying to check in with everybody. I'm sensitive to what Carrie said, which is that folks feel like they can't really move forward.
Yeah, and also like you can't eliminate, because you know some other favors favored at least favored, so you can't do it by elimination. So
I'm trying to figure out what additional information would I want. I'm not sure. So I guess I'd have to hear from others what additional information they'd want. I feel like I have a reasonable amount of information. What I'm concerned about is I don't think we're going to come to a consensus recommendation. And I don't know what a stack rank would therefore mean.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's basically, do you think that visual appeal is extremely important, or are other considerations more important? That seems to be part of it.
Well, I think I'll say for my part, I disagree with what Larry, Larry made it. We had the discussion last week about the 4 tracks, and what I'm struggling with is, regardless of how we as a group feel about 4 tracks, the facts on the ground is that Caltrain is telling us that, they are land banking essentially for 4 tracks, and that the onus would be on the city to show via conceptual designs from a potential future stack, a future 4-track segment would not be precluded in any of our designs. So it makes it really difficult, because I don't know that we know any of our designs would necessarily preclude 4 tracks, and it would sort of be our best engineering guess. So I have that makes it difficult for me in terms of proceeding. The only way that goes away is whether high-speed rail defines the passing tracks in their EIR, which the city and the Caltrain have asked them to do, but they're just not there in their process. Or if high-speed rail magically goes away anytime soon, which, given in my experience, also isn't likely in the time frame that we're looking at. So then that means that, I feel like we're sort of stuck. In terms of the further engineering work, I would disagree again with what Larry said, having been part of the technical group. So, Keith and Tony and Phil and I were the ones at the time who were on the technical group. And if you recall, we didn't even want to release the designs from Meadow because we had not had a full, robust discussion. The first pictures that had been drawn by the consultants were not even what the original design that was proposed was. And we basically ran out of time to be able to consider those further, because it was right around when coronavirus was happening. And so it was clear that there was not going to be any more money available to continue to iterate any further. And so it's not that there hasn't been suggestions on ways to improve that. It's just that we were not able to get any of those suggestions and work with AECOM to draw those pictures out. We've definitely had those discussions. And so to me, that makes it so that I am also, it's also a lean. I'm with everybody else. I think that these are all really difficult decisions. The way I see this, honestly, the default, if we could never all agree on something, is what's been done in every other city, which is a hybrid. So the onus is on us to really decide whether we want to explore something different. So I think that the underpass needs more work. I'm definitely sensitive to the fact that it has eminent domain. And I want to be clear, the city council gave us guidelines to minimize eminent domain, but didn't prohibit it. But it's still an iterative process, right? And I think it's incumbent upon any further work on that design to try as much as possible to minimize any eminent domain that would be part of that. I think We also need to get the bike ped stuff. The bike ped stuff is definitely not there. I think it's the beginning of this conversation with that particular design option. I still think that it has merit. And remember, it was put forth because everybody hates the elevated alternatives and everybody worries about the environmental impacts of the trench. I mean, like others, I have been doing this for a long time. I've heard the community loud and clear when it comes to the trench. And I hear Keith, even with the uncertainty around the prices. I think my concern is even if the trench price, frankly, came down to the same price as a viaduct or an underpass, if they were all even, the desire for the trench is really strong, but I have just such significant concerns about the environmental impacts that I have trouble with that. I do think that the elevated options are terrible, but I am more in favor of the viaduct than I am of the hybrid for the reasons that the others have already said, which is number one, if you can push it away from the homes, then it does feel less, I think, imposing to the houses that are there. I think it has less of a wall feeling. When I started this process in like 2009, I was able to do a tour of the hybrid that was built in San Carlos with the the person who was city manager at the time. And actually the neighborhood association that is of the folks who live on the east side of the tracks, the Greater East San Carlos Neighborhood Association. And they reported that once that hybrid was built, they felt much more disconnected from the rest of San Carlos. And so I'm sensitive to, I think one of the public speakers also talked about, there's a north-south Palo Alto. We don't also want to create an east-west Palo Alto. So as much as I loathe something that's up in the air, as much as everybody else does, it is flat for bikes and peds. It does provide at least a better feeling of connectivity. I can't say that it provides any specific connectivity. But so that's my thing is, if the city were asking me what to spend more money on, if they're picking up their pencils in 2 years after the Caltrain study, or even while that Caltrain study is being looked at, I would want to look a little bit further at the underpass and understand what's happening. That's kind of where I am. But I'm very sensitive to folks feeling like we can't really, that they're not okay. Like if they're forced to make a decision, they'll make something, but that they don't feel like it's something that they could actually recommend. And then so that's why I wanted to hear more about what are those things. And to be honest, I'm not really clear on how the stacked ranking would work either, but I'd love to hear more about it. I'm mindful that this process has gone on for a long time. We don't want to lose 2 years of work. Where I have been comfortable is saying these are the pros and cons and laying out for council the very specific things that a Caltrain study should be looking at and what are the biggest questions that we have that might move the needle between some alternatives and the others, and not necessarily having to make a recommendation as a group, but that's where I am. And so I just wanted to throw that. Yeah, Greg. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I don't mean to keep raising my hand, but I wanted to make sure. So
No, it's okay.
One small point and then actually two small points. On the what else would I know? You reminded me, what else would I like to know? I would like to know what's going to happen with 4 tracks. And I'd like to know whether there's going to be a peninsula-wide effort to come up with a grade separation project that might produce some economies of scale and maybe some additional funding. Now I'm with Dave. If someone gave Palo Alto $1 billion and told us we were required to spend it on rail infrastructure, I would still not be in favor of building a tunnel in South Palo Alto. I can think of a lot of things we could do with public transportation infrastructure in this area. I'd like to bury 101. That would have a much bigger impact on noise in my neighborhood. But anyway, seriously, I would love to know about. But to me, both of those answers, is there going to be a peninsula-wide effort? And are there going to be a requirement for 4 tracks? That's going to take 2 years, I bet, if not 3. So it seems to me that we need to do the best we can with what we have, give our best recommendation, whether it's a stack rank or whether it's a Supreme Court style, majority and minority report, and expect that the process is going to continue. And my second thing is just real quick. A number of people mentioned public opinion. Public opinion among people who write and call to XCAP is very clear. They hate elevated options. They've made that abundantly clear. There are very few brave souls who are willing to say they don't hate elevated options. However, in our report this week, we also have a survey that was done at the town hall by the town. And I won't say it's conclusive, But I will say that more people said they were in favor of hybrid than any other option. So, and that was a survey that was done of a fairly wide sample of people in the town. I don't want to run this on polls. I don't want to run it on public opinions, but I'm saying I don't think we should assume that writers and callers to XCAP are necessarily going to have the same opinion than all of Palo Alto would they be asked to vote on spending money on something. And that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? We have about 4 minutes before the time that we said we're going to let people go to see the debate. So I just wonder if anyone else wants to get something in. Yeah, Tony.
So just like Greg mentioned, I would also suggest that we look at landscaping and so issues about how far the tracks could be to alleviate some of the visual problems, understanding that the visual problems with a viaduct are the most severe, most quoted issues when people don't like the viaduct. So even if it's roughly in the right area, having some idea of what kind of landscaping and how far back it is would really help.
What do you guys think of, and I'm totally thinking out loud, so this is not pre-planned. What do you guys think about taking Larry's idea? I liked how Larry basically described that there's none of these issues that we love. So what if we tried to think about, you know, on each of the alternatives that we've ranked or that we've not, you know, we don't love, how do we make them better? In other words, what would be the changes that you could make to viaducts? Tony, I hear you saying that landscaping would really help you, at least if you could hide it or you didn't have to see it, maybe, you know, that would really improve things. So I think maybe thinking about it that way could also help us think about what other critical answer we might be able to get that would help us get behind things. So maybe that's one way to frame it. I don't know what others think. And Keith, I see your hand up. Did you want to speak? I'm sorry, I missed that before.
Yeah, I want to talk to Greg's point about the pole issue. Is that this is a fundamental problem with public works projects, is the people nearby who are being impacted the most are in a minority, and the people who are impacted very little or not at all are in the majority. And does that mean that the nearby people get a veto? No, you can't run it that way, but it does mean that if something is feasible that meets their requirements, and if you can make it meet your requirements and their requirements, if it's feasible, we should do it. And to me, the trench and potentially the underpass both meet the neighborhoods, could meet the neighborhood's requirements and would meet our requirements. And so we really should do a full court press on making those work.
All right. Yeah, Inyoung. Oh, you're muted, Inyoung.
I put my virtual background to be the pole that I see from my backyard. It's unfortunately picture is flipped, but this big structure, I look at it every day, and now, you know, no matter what you do with the tree, I have actually 100-foot tree, you know, in my backyard, and you know, apparently this one is, you know, unfortunately put it in open, and I cannot imagine. This is just one pole that I have to look at. It bothers me, and it bothers everybody else on you know, Mariposa Park. And you know, I can't imagine having like a 45 angle, day life-saving, and then having that structure, and then, you know, hidden by the tree. It's not going to be, you know, anything imaginable. You know, I think theoretically it may be possible, but you actually go look at it and then imagine it, and you look at backyard, you might think it differently. That's all I want to say.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, I guess we'll put a pin in it there. And I will just suggest that we think about what could make our alternatives better that stink. And maybe we start to think about how to try to improve those. That's all I've got for today. Thanks, guys. Go watch the debates. Thanks, everybody. Bye.